Back in the early 2000s, there was a boy named Julian. He was a very depressed and angsty teenager with zero confidence. This boy was insecure, awkward, and depressed. In those days, Julian would daydream about how it felt to be in love, what it was like to have someone to care about and someone to care about him, someone to hug and embrace and spend quality time with. All he really wanted was genuine love. Fast forward to his early 20s, he became the total opposite. Partying in Europe 10 people deep, women in literally dozens of countries, a few heartbreaks for character development. He was charismatic and prided himself on his gym habit. Julian was living the ideal life of a young man for years, experiencing things that most people don't get to experience in their entire lives. Traveling was just a part of life, whether it be for leisure or for work. But one work trip in particular would lead to a life-changing event. He fell in love with the girl he met on temporary duty in the US. Things went great for a while. They clicked immediately. The time they spent together was fun and full of laughs. Their relationship remained this way, and as it developed, he began to think, maybe he found the one. Until he found out she'd been lying to him. Let's just say that this specific lie was even worse than cheating. The feeling of his heart and gut sinking when he found out will stick with him forever. But she begged him not to leave her and swore she would never do what she did again. Like an idiot, Julian forgave her, and eventually they rented a house together. Needless to say, over time, Julian grew miserable. Within months, he'd become emotionally and financially drained. After dozens of fights, lies, and breakups to makeups, Julian ended up cheating and knocking someone else up. Listen to Confessions Part 2 by Usher, because that's exactly what happened. When Julian told his girl about this situation, she tearfully pulled his .45 out of his closet, cocked it back, and aimed it right at him from 3 feet away. He didn't feel any fear, not because he was being brave, but by then he was just so emotionally drained that he just felt nothing. After the situation simmered down, she began to storm out of the house, gun in hand, and Julian ended up having to wrestle the .45 from her grasp. She left shortly, and Julian was bitter. He decided that he hated women, he hated relationships, he even hated the idea of love itself. This went on for some time, but instead of taking the time to resolve his trauma, he did what most people do and got into another relationship a couple months after. Idiot. He met her on a temporary duty in Vegas. Now this girl was the kindest and most loving girl Julian had been with. Together, they would travel to different countries and enjoy each other's company at her family's parties and vacations. But over time, Julian's demons started to creep back up. He was still adjusting to the lonely, unstructured civilian life after 6 years in the military, and he fell into a dark place. The hatred and resentment from his previous relationship began to resurface and distort his perception of his new relationship. He became an extremely toxic person, insecure, jealous, controlling, condescending, and unwilling to compromise. Eventually, the girl had had enough of the abuse and left, and Julian's heart was shattered. He knew that this was his fault. He knew he had just lost something good because he was a mess. Everything that he had been through crept back up. The trauma from early adolescence, life at home, and all these terrible relationships he'd had up to that point. He eventually realized that if he was ever to have a good relationship with a girl, he needed to get his together. So he started going to church, started journaling, started seeing a therapist, and he finally started pursuing his goals. By now you'd think that Julian finally learned his lesson and remained focused, right? Wrong. A few months later, he met another girl. He saw all the bright red flags, but over time, she convinced him to give her a chance. She was persistent and very persuasive, but she was the total opposite of the girl he was last with. This new one would accuse Julian of many things that he eventually found out she was doing. She was always the victim, she never took accountability for her mistakes, and just had a negative outlook on everything. She began to drain him. He'd have dreams of being in the same room as this girl and his last ex, and he realized how unenjoyable she was to be around. Well, one day Julian had had enough of the negativity and lying, so he left her. This was it. He was done going to the bars, he was done with hookup culture, and he was done being too nice to say no to relationships. This was at the end of 2019, and to this day, Julian has not compromised on his promise to himself. He promised himself that he would not get into another relationship until he got his life together and he unpacked all his trauma. He learned to be alone and to love it. He learned to become his own source of happiness, to have a good work ethic, to overcome most of his bad habits, and most importantly, he developed a set of values that he refuses to compromise on. He decided to become a real high-value man because this is how you find high-value friends and romantic partners. No more trauma bonding. So, why did I tell you this story? Well, one, so I won't ever have to tell it again, and I could just refer you to this video in the future. And two, because I want you to know that when I give relationship advice, it's coming from a genuine, incredible source. Someone who's experienced with partners from different cultures, languages, upbringings, financial statuses, values, etc., etc. I'm not saying this to flex. I'm just letting you know that I'm not some fucking dweeb. I'm not proud of everything in my past, but I've learned from it, and I really don't want people to have to go through the same thing. My intentions when I speak about love and relationships are to encourage people to approach these things with a sense of responsibility and authenticity. Remember, everything you do has consequences. Guys, you pursued her just to fuck around and then ghosted her, and you expect her not to have a distaste towards men? We have to understand that we play a role too in this cycle of infidelity. Hurt people hurt people. Ladies, no man who respects himself is going to want to be with a woman who doesn't respect herself. I'm sorry, but it's just the way it is. Modern feminism is going to leave you bitter and alone. You're free to do whatever it is that you want to do, but you aren't free from the consequences of your choices. And speaking of choices, let's talk about where a majority of young men choose to get advice on women and relationship these days. There seems to be an epidemic of red pill content creators that spew a bunch of bullshit relationship advice. They prey on low confidence men who have no direction or guidance. These guys claim that they'll get you laid in 30 days. Many of them are fueled by resentment from their past experiences. Many of them aren't as mature and developed as they claim to be. It's clear that either they don't really give a about the well-being of the people listening to them, or they're just not as self-aware as they claim to be. They're mostly ego-driven. A person who wants the best for you is not going to tell you to go with yours or other people's lives. Guys, if you really want a girl to like you, just view them as a regular person, not an objective. I promise you, they can sense when you approach them with a motive. And yes, having a bit of an edge is more attractive than just straight up being Mr. Nice Guy. You gotta be able to poke fun at them and be interesting. But that doesn't mean you need to be an asshole or not give a f. Be a f***ing man, not a child. Time is the most valuable resource. Try to appreciate that you're sharing that with someone else. Realize that regardless of your gender or sexual orientation, there's a human being right in front of you, with their own lives, their own situations, and their own traumas. There's something we can learn from them, and there's always something we can do to make their lives suck just a bit less. The bottom line is, if you know you have shit you need to work out, then prioritize that before you get into relationships. Do the self-work, find some values to stand firm on, unless you'd rather keep attracting trash and getting sucked into unhealthy relationships and having meaningless hookups every other weekend. We all know that these things can be fun, but they do nothing to fulfill us. They're just a way for us to temporarily fill an empty space. Don't contribute to the cycle of hate. And for Christ's sake, stop listening to these dumbass red pill relationship experts. Well, that's all I got for today. Thanks for listening, and I hope I was able to provide some valuable insight. My goal is to give you shortcuts for your own self-development journey by sharing from my heart and soul what I've learned in life. If that's something you'd like to support, then consider checking out my Patreon. I'll leave the link in the description. Like and subscribe and share it to someone that you think needs to see this. Hopefully I'll be able to do this for a living someday and make a positive impact so we can heal humanity one step at a time. Thank you.